recording.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me in this next session, talking about using ClinFHIR as to how to learn FHIR. I hope you were able to come to the previous session. It covered a number of the base information that I think is important to know about FHIR. Excuse me. So the topic is using ClinFHIR to learn about FHIR. As I said in the earlier presentation, we had hoped to be able to do this last year. It didn't actually happen, so it's great to be able to be here and to actually do it. This session is going to be pretty much all on practical use of the tool. I've only got a couple of slides that I'll talk about, and then we'll go straight into demonstrations. Doing live demonstrations is always a potentially challenging exercise, so hopefully we won't have any problems, but we never know. And again, just a quick, in case you hadn't seen the previous presentation, this is just about me pointing out the fact that I'm a medical doctor, or I was a medical doctor. It's been 20 or 30 years since I practiced medicine, but I've been involved in HL7 and involved in FHIR for many years. And again, this is just a copy from the previous presentation. I am assuming that you are somebody with more of a clinical or informatics background and wanting to understand and learn more about what FHIR actually is. And ClinFHIR is very much intended to help people understand FHIR. It actually, I think I'll move on to that. Yes, so ClinFHIR actually grew out of a need to assist clinical folk to understand FHIR. And it sort of began about 5 years ago or so when FHIR was starting to become more accepted inside of HL7. The technologists, the techie people, they kind of understood what FHIR was trying to do, and they were very enthusiastic about it. But the clinical folk were having a bit of difficulty in sort of understanding it because, you know, things like XML and JSON, which make a lot of sense to a technical person, are less familiar to informaticians and clinicians. So ClinFHIR was developed in conjunction with the HL7 community, the patient care work group actually within HL7, to help them become more deeply involved in the development of FHIR. And it's evolved over that time. So it's available on the web at ClinFHIR.com. It's free to use. It's not open source as such, simply because it's only developed by myself, and so there's really no need to open source it. But it is free to use. It always will be free to use. Do not use it for real data. It's free and available on the web. There's almost no security around it. As I've said, it is an education tool and also a design tool. I won't be covering that in this particular session, but quite a number of people are using some of the modules inside of ClinFHIR to actually design FHIR artifacts. But I'm going to focus on the education aspects of it. So this is what you see when you go to ClinFHIR.com. So these are some of the modules, the patient viewer, graph builder, and so forth that are available. I need to call out just a couple of things. So the first thing, in fact, I think it's the main thing, is the concept of servers. So ClinFHIR was designed to be able to work with FHIR servers in order to display and update information. And in order for that, you need to tell it which server to actually use. And this is where you do that. So when you go to ClinFHIR.com, if you click on this edit link down through here, it will allow you to set the server, excuse me, that you're wanting to use. I'm using one of my own ones, but there are plenty of other servers that you can try. If you're having difficulties, incidentally, you can reach out to me for help on the FHIR chat, and there was a link to the FHIR chat on the previous presentation. So that's where you would set your servers. That's saying, where is the information that I am looking at? And I'm actually going to show you two different modules. The first module is the patient viewer module, which is intended to show data that already exists. You can actually create sample data there as well if you want to. And then the second one I'm going to show you is Graph Builder. And Graph Builder is the tool that lets you build those graphs that we showed in the previous presentation. So I'm going to exit the presentation now. And I'm going to go into ClinFHIR. So here we are in ClinFHIR. As I've said, that's the data server there. I'm using one of my own ones, but if you want to, you can click on edit and then change it to a number of other ones. A common one that people use is the FHIR server, but I'm going to stick with my NZ Project R4, so I will cancel that. To go into the patient viewer, you click on the patient viewer link over here. And when I do that, it will bring me up to the screen here. So the first thing I need to do is to select the patient whose information I wish to take a look at. And I use the select button link for that, the select patient button for that. And then I enter a name, such as Hey. I can also enter the ID or identifier if I happen to know this information. In most cases, the surname is the best one. I click on search. And what's happened now is that ClinFHIR has gone out to the FHIR server and it said, do you have any patients with the name Hey? And it's come back with 2. And I will select Levi. And then it then goes back to the FHIR server and says, right, give me all the information that you have on Levi Hay. And this is what's been described back. So here are the resource types. And remember, we talked about types and instances, the cookie cutter back in the previous presentation. So this patient has got 2 allergy intolerances, 2 appointments, 11 conditions, 10 encounters, and so forth. If I want to look at any one of them, I select them. So let's look at allergy intolerance. And if I click on that, here are the 2 allergy intolerances to ibuprofen and an allergy to eggs. To look at those details, I click further. So let's go to ibuprofen. And so here we now have the details of the allergy intolerance resource, which represents an ibuprofen intolerance. And there are a number of different views that we have of this resource. So, and these tabs here show all of those. So this view just pulls it out into a tree-like format. So we see here the resource type is allergy intolerance. We see the code. There's that link, the terminology link that we talked about on the previous session. There was the system, which is SNOMED. That's the code inside of that system, and that's ibuprofen. That's what the JSON view looks like. So this would what it would look like on the wire. There's the XML view. And also what's kind of handy is I can look at the references. So the allergy intolerance resource has got a reference to the patient. And it's also got a reference to the practitioner. And then it has a reference from a list. And I can dig into those if I want to. So if, for example, I click on the list resource, then I see that the list resource now has a reference to 2 allergy intolerances and to the patient. I could click on the patient resource. And I see that a lot of things link to the patient. And I can do this for any particular resource. So for example, if I look at a condition resource for asthma, those are the other references. That's what the JSON looks like. There's the XML, there's the tree-like view, and so on and so forth. And I can do that for any of the resources. So that's probably the most useful view. There are some other views that we've got. We can look at all of the resources for a patient, and again we start to see that this is getting quite complicated. I can limit that a little bit. So if I only wanted to look at the lists, for example, then I can do something like that, and we'll see the graph changing over time. So this is letting us visualize what the information looks like. And these are just some sort of, they're just fun type applications. So they're saying that if I had the structured data, what could I do with it? So that's what the respiratory rate looks like. If I have encounters, I can draw a timeline of the encounters for this patient. This is the reason for the encounter. I can dive into an encounter, and so on and so forth. So what this is wanting to show is if you've got the structured coded data, here are the sorts of things that you might want to be able to do with it. So that's the patient viewer. Again, freely available. If you want to, you can, if I go back to select patient, you can add a new patient, and what that will do is that will create some sample data for you. So if you pointed at a server where there isn't any existing data, this will allow you to add it. So it's a useful tool to be able to view patient data that exists. Graph Builder. So the Graph Builder tool, this is as I've said before, it's a way of being able to create those graphs. And you'll remember from the example I gave in the previous talk of the consultation, how we have the linked together resources. So what this does is this lets you create your own graphs. The graph builder tool in various incarnations has been around for pretty much since ClinFHIR has been around. This is the latest version of it. It's still being actively developed, but I did want to show you how it works. So you load it from a different URL. Unlike the patient viewer, the graph builder doesn't need to have a FHIR server. There are downsides to being dependent on a FHIR server. So Graph Builder 2 just runs on its own at this resource. So we go into here, click on the new project. I give the new project a name. So I'm going to make this problem list. Oops. And I'll say that's to show how a problem list is represented in FHIR. There's various things you can do. I'm going to keep it fairly simple to start out with. So I do that, and I've now created my new project. This project sits on in my local browser, so it's inside my browser, not on yours. If you were to go to Graph Builder on your own computer, you will see a different set of projects. So I open the project now. So the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to add instances to my project, and this is about a problem list. So I'm going to need a patient. So I click on this button here that says Add New Resource Instance, and I select the patient type, and there it is. I give it a name, John Doe, like so, and so there is my patient that's been added to my graph. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a condition. So again, I'll go back to my Add New Resource Instance. I'll add a condition. This represents the actual problem itself. We type on condition. I'll say this is the patient has asthma, and we add it like so. So now I have added my asthma condition to the list, and it automatically connected it to the patient, because it knew that the asthma resource has got an element called subject, and that subject is a patient. It found a patient, so it joined it up. I can change that if I need to, but we'll leave it like that for now. I'll add another resource instance, which is also going to be a condition, and I will call this one diabetes, like so. Oops. And add that, and again, so I now have asthma, which is a condition, diabetes, which is a condition, and the patient themselves. But I'm wanting to represent a list, so I'm going to need a list resource. So I click on my Add New Resource Instance again. I select list, like so. I've now got my list. So I've got my list, which is pointing at the patient, but the list isn't pointing to the conditions, which is really what I want it to do. So what I want to do now is I want to add that connection. I want to add that reference to the condition. And I do that by first selecting the resource, and you can see the details of it appearing at the top here. And then down the bottom here, this bottom part where it says potential references, what this is this is all the possible connections that you could make for this resource in this particular graph. So I can connect the entry item to a patient, I can connect it to a condition, or I can to a condition down there. And I can add that reference. So let's say I want to connect it to the condition. Then I click on it like so, and it adds the reference. I'm going to add diabetes. So I wind up with something like this. So this is the way that FHIR can be used to represent a problem list. And hopefully what you can see is that by using this kind of, click and add facility, you can very quickly answer the question, how does FHIR represent a consultation? So, if you wanted to, you could build up a graph that represented that consultation that we looked at. There are a number of different views. This one's the graph view that shows the pictures. This one's a list view, and the list view shows the same sorts of things, but it has this little bit extra is if I click on that button right there, it will take me to the specification for that resource type. So that's very handy if I put a condition on there, but I want to know a little bit more about it. You know, what's the exact purpose of it? What are the structured data that's in it, and so forth. So that's a handy view there. So I'll go back to the graph because that's often the easiest to understand. So we've got the actual references. What we haven't got is any structured or coded data. So let's go and add that. And we'll do that for the condition resource. So again, I select my condition resource. You'll notice how over here it said that this is the it's the asthma resource. I could add text if I wanted to. And then we have this tab called resource content. And the resource content shows the content of the resource. So I click on that. What we'll see is we'll see the FSH, the FHIR shorthand that represents this particular resource. And that was really why I wanted to call out the use of FSH FHIR shorthand in the previous presentation. So what this is saying is that this is an instance of condition. It's got a description of just condition 1, which was a bit boring, I must admit. And there is the reference to the subject, John Doe. Let's say I want to add some more structured data to that. Then this button right here will call up the editor screen. And if I go into that one, okay, down the left-hand side here, I have all of the elements that can be made for a condition. And this, again, you'll remember back in the previous presentation, I talked about the desire to be able to have profiles that are computable, that a computer can understand. And here is a good example of that, because what the tooling has done is it's gone away and it's got the computable definition. So therefore it's able to generate that user interface directly from the computable definition. So if I, for example, want to say that this is asthma, I click on that codable concept. I then type in that it's asthma. Put an M in there. Expand button. Now what we're doing is, again, you recall from my my previous discussion how the instance is always going to point to the actual code system. And I also touched very briefly on the concept of operations. So what this has done is this has gone to my terminology server, and my terminology server has got an operation called expand. And what that does is that says that for this particular value set, which I didn't point out, but there's a value set, the selector, of course, behind this, can you give me all of the concepts that have got ASTM in their name? And it goes away and it comes back with a list, which I can then show, and I can then select one and put it into the list. And so there we have now added the coded representation of this condition as being asthma. And I can repeat this for anything. So if I want to know what the severity is, I click on there. Oh, the category, sorry, that's the category. If I want the severity, there's the severity, severe. And as I go through, I'm building up this FHIR shorthand representation, and I convert it into JSON by clicking on that link there. And so I now have the actual JSON. So the reason for using the FSH is to make it more possible to use profiles. As you move on in your FHIR exploration, you'll find that it gets progressively gets more complicated as you start to get further into it, particularly with things like profiling and such like, and creating instances of profiles. So I'm using FSH FHIR shorthand to create those profiles. So I'm sorry, to create those examples. So there we have the example, and again, just a reminder that this is what it looks like in JSON. I think I'm probably fairly close to time, so I'll just show you a couple more things. The most important one is the help. So if you click on that question mark there, will take you to this help screen. In particular, there are some quick start examples here which talk about how to run through and how to create some of these things. The problem list. There's a slightly more complicated one showing how you'd represent an appendectomy, or an appendicectomy is how I call it in New Zealand. there's the otitis media one, and so on and so forth. So the tool is out there, it's free to use. If you have any questions, then the FHIR chat, and maybe I should just very quickly, since I'm in the browser, this is the FHIR chat. And as you can see, it has a number of streams down through here, and then we have questions, and you will see there is the, where are we? Let's look at terminology. So here's an example of people asking questions and getting answers and so forth. And there's a ClinFHIR stream, which sits, oh, where is it? Ah, it's down there, right there. So that's the ClinFHIR stream, and that's what's where I can help out people having issues. So that's, in summary, that's the patient viewer, letting you look at data which already exists, and the graph builder, which allows you to construct graphs of particular purposes. And I think that probably is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you again, David Hay. You appreciate for your presentation. All these tools, they get easier to make a use case, a scenario of the problems we can we can arrange in the clinical area, especially. So I don't know if the participants have any questions, any further questions about this presentation. No. So oh yes, we have a question here. Say if I have a custom extension, it is possible to use in ClinFHIR, say Alejandro Medina.
Yes, it is, although there's a couple of steps that you need to go through, and right here, right now, you would need my assistance to do that. The way that works is that when I create my project, I'll edit this one here, I can indicate that it's understands certain extension, certain implementation guides. So I can say, for example, that I understand US core. And if I do that, so I'm now saying that I can now understand US core, then when I go into my my graph and I add a new resource, I can actually add a resource from US core. So I can add, for example, a US core procedure. And then that is linked up to the patient. And then if I go into the tool and I go to the resource content for US core procedure, you can see it's wound that up through there. If I go to the editor, you can see that these are the ones that profile has made required. Doesn't look like there's any extensions on here. So let's go back to the new resource instance. Let's go into US core, go into US core patient there. I'll add that. That's now US core patient. As you can see, I only have the basics here. If I now go into the editor, we now see the extensions which have been provided. At the moment, this is fairly rudimentary, and it also depends if it's a coded element. It depends on actually having the code present in the terminology server, which in this case it isn't. For string extensions, you can add it straight away. You know, I could actually add, you know, race is European, for example, and there you can see is where it's added it into the FSH. This is very much a work in progress. I'm intending to do a lot more about this in the weeks and months to come. If it's something that's of interest to you, and in particular if it's something which you're working on in Chile or wherever, reach out to me directly, either through my email or through the FHIR chat, whichever you feel comfortable with, and let's talk about this further. And I'm very, very happy to incorporate the implementation guides that you guys are working on, and to enhance the tooling here so that it properly supports it. I should say that the goal, where I'm aiming to with this, is it should be able to support any implementation guide at all. and using tools behind the scenes, services behind the scenes like the FSH and the Sushi is allowing me to do that.
Well, thank you for your answers and again for your presentation. I hope all the participants enjoyed these scenario builders, and we hope the more developers, more implementers co-work with clinicians and make this the magic happen with the scenario with problem scenarios as you show in the, I don't know, prescription, clinical findings, diagnostic reports, and other scenarios or process in clinical areas.
So one thing I'll add, that's a really good point. One thing again, on the vision, I'll just remove that because it mucks up the thing. There's a concept here which I call the library. And so the idea of it is to be able for somebody to be able to create a graph of some sort and then save it in a library. And then once it's in the library, then anybody can go to it and they can take a look at it. So that's the one I just created. That's another one that I was playing with before. And so it will be lovely to think that we come up with a whole series of how to represent scenarios so that somebody who's new doesn't have to start from scratch every time. They could go into the library and see, aha, here's a problem list. Let's see how they did it, and then download it into their own application. So again, if it's something of interest in your country, I would love to work with you to make that work properly.
Well, thank you again, David Hay, for to be here. So we finished this presentation for today. So
okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you, and all the best for your conference. And I look forward to seeing you in the community.
Of course, we will see you.
Okay. All right.